right? How to change perception, how to physiologically relax. The good news is, I'm going to return, the sympathetic nervous sends out alarm bell warnings, right? The parasympathetic nervous system is actually responsible for rest and digestion, right? And calming and so on. The parasympathetic nervous system is connected to exhalations. So if your meditation method is actually meditation on the breath, it will directly reverse the process. Right? For example, you know, your body, mind, and breath. These are intimately related. You're very stressed out, your body is tense, your breathing is panting. So if you want your body to behave a certain way, free of kind of chronic stomach problems or whatever, you can go about it changing the mind, regulating the breath. They're like a tripod. Right? You change one thing, the other two will change. You change this thing, the other two will change. So you actually, physiologically, you're actually having some method to change that. We'll talk about that, okay? Thank you for the question. Because that helped me to stir up all your interest to see what comes next. You know? So anyway, these are some of the problems. And here's a chart for them. You know, cognitively, we will have memory loss. And when the dendrites, the receptors of the stress from the hippocampus shrinks, that actually is connected to memory. So we wouldn't be able to remember things. Inability to concentrate, poor judgment, and also they've studied prisoners, prisoners who have chronic stress level, living in very stressful situations, some of them, and also just basically act on, some of them act on their emotions on a very chronic level. They found that the amygdala actually enlarges, becomes bigger because it's more exercise. It's like muscle, you keep on using it. And they found meditators, guess what they found? Think. Not quite smaller, but the prefrontal cortex is more active. Their prefrontal cortex, is actually the wall is thicker. They're able to exercise that more. So in Chinese, we talk about reason and emotion, 理性, 感性. So when a person is able to exercise a certain part of their brain, then they actually change neuron by neuron, physiologically change the makeup of the brain. That's what scientists call neuroplasticity. It's kind of elastic, you can kind of change it. Some of the other physiological aches and pains, more prone to aches and pains, diarrhea, constipation, nausea, loss of sex drive. Loss of sex drive is like, when you're under threat. Think of, I don't know, the dinosaur age. The person is always kind of looking. Actually, the dinosaur lived when human beings are not even around it. But let's just do the cartoon version of it. You're living in a very stressful situation. The last thing you think of is sex. You think about food. You think about how to survive, right? But in this example, when a person is actually very stressed, they also have loss of appetite, loss of stress, loss of sex drive, and emotional symptoms, very moody, irritability, short-tempered. Their amygdala is very active. Isolation. Also, some of these symptoms overlap with depression. Behaviorally, eating disorder, sleeping disorder, and so on. Well, what I want to say is that the problem is not really stress in life, but how we react to these situations. And the key is, from the perspective of cognitive, behavioral neuroscience, the different branches of neuroscience, is based on perception, based on how we cognitive appraise certain stuff. Because it's not really that stress is actually outside. If it's actually outside, then everyone should have the same response, because the problem is actually outside. So all of you see a squiggling stuff, or actually turn on the light, oh, it's just a rubber snake or something, or it's a real snake, you should have the same response. But because we have different response, a snake catcher is, oh great, a cobra versus a person. You know, you've never seen a snake, see a snake, they should have the same response. But because they're not, that means the way you perceive things. And this is our key. This is our key. And here's the Zen part of it. I'll go into a little more detail. Our perception is based on our sense of self, our sense of who we are, and our accumulated narrative sense of, you know, your own personal history, how you grow up, how you were, your childbearing process, which made you a certain way, kind of shaped you a certain way. For example, a person who is always kind of suppressed, told by the parents, you're wrong, you can't do this, you can't do that. They may grow up to be kind of introverted or self-disparaging ideas, but if they're encouraged by parents to explore, to see things as challenge and opportunity, then they grow up a certain type. Right? So all of these accumulated kind of sense of how we respond, maybe children learn it from parents, observing the parents, how they respond, or the kind of culture that they live in. So all of these baggage constitute the sense of who we are, the sense of self. So perception is based on the sense of self. Now, here's the situation. Normally, most of this just goes unconscious. We see a stressor, and we have these physiological reactions. We don't know why. Our stomach hurts. You know? Sometimes people, even when they enter into a room, like, I don't know, their office environment, as soon as the elevator opens, they just start to feel kind of, or certain people that remind them, they will just behave a certain way, or they have similar symptoms to different kinds of stress. So all we know is, that's the problem, my co-worker, perhaps, and that's the cause for my thing. But things are more complex, as I've shown already. From the Zen perspective, it is a sense of self that's mediating all of our experiences. It is a sense of self. This, in Zen, or in Chan, or in Buddhism, is what we refer to as self-referentiality. Sometimes say self-attachment. In Chinese, those of you who know, 自我. So here, I'm not talking about, in Buddhism, in Zen, when they talk about 自我, they're not referring to 自我like selfish. A person can be very humble, and the self-attachment can be very strong. The person who commits suicide, jump off the building, right? Have no sense of self, I don't care about who I am. That person actually has a very, very strong sense of self in order to put himself or herself through that. So the Buddhist notion, or Zen notion of self, selfishness is only one very small part of it. It's just one manifestation of it. It's actually this self-reference that mediates all of your experience, all of our experience, moment to moment to moment. And that sense of self, from the Zen perspective, is a simulated self. It's a construct. It wasn't ever there. It's like the Matrix. All of us are just plugged in. You know what I'm talking about, right? How many of you have not seen The Matrix, the movie? You haven't. Okay, you gotta go to a Blockbuster. And just, all of us are kind of, through our upbringing, our consensus, our educational system, everything has taught us, and the way our brain functions, the way our brain simulates a kind of spatial sense of where we are in this room in terms of oppositions. I am here, you are out there, you are outside me. That kind of construct, mental construct, that's self. It's nothing to do with humbleness or selfish or this and that. So that, along with everything else that the brain generates, including the language that it learns, the icons, the symbols that it learns, is a construct. It's a simulation. All the scenarios, the story that you tell yourself of who you are. You look at the picture, that's me, I'm this type of person, I'm that type of person. This kind of story that you tell yourself, it's actually a construct. Right? It's the brain's wonderful ability to simulate a sense of who you are. If I were to say it frankly, it's actually a byproduct of the brain, synapses. Now, this put a damper on you, thinking, I know myself all these years. I mean, I'm that type of person, that type of person. I do this, I do that. It's just your brain processing this thing. Now, it's not to say that we want to cut off, divorce ourselves, put ourselves away from the stressors. That's really the culprit. What I'm saying is very different. What I'm saying is see through the veil of this processor. Right? And you can still be in the midst of work, stressful work perhaps, or obligations that you have to do, and this and that. Except you start to change your perception of it. Also cognitively and behaviorally. So every time you go to your work environment that's very stressful, or the things that you have to do, you change your perception. You say, I'm entering the meditation hall now, which is my office desk, like this and that. You change your perception. If you can do that, we'll talk about that a little later. Concrete practice. Scientists tell us it takes us like 3 weeks, 21 days to make a habit. As short as 21 days, continuous. 21 days. If you do certain things over and over, you will start to change. So it's a matter of seeing things in a positive way, seeing threat as opportunity, free. Like you don't even have to pay money for someone to train your patients. Like it's free. You go to work and this person's gonna, here it comes the Buddha. Hi, how are you doing, John? What are you gonna give me today? The free opportunity, you start to see that for 21 days, you will start to see, you will start to notice things in positive terms. Instead of saying, here's a guy, let me just cut him off. Pretend I'm doing something else. Hopefully he won't see me. If you change yourself, we'll talk about that a little later, but here I like to just highlight that the sense of self, because it's originally not there, it can be changed. Here's some things to watch out for. Common traits of self-reference. All of us do this. It's quite fun to go over them because it reveals so frankly about how we relate to things. First thing that, and none of this is really dealing with like selfishness or stinginess, and, that kind of self. Buddhism and Zen is not talking about that kind of self. It's talking about this continual presence of, it's really an assumption that there's something separate, independent, permanent, the sense of I. who I am. That's in the center of all of our judgments, all of